continue to funnel our taxpayer dollars to a foreign government? Do they not understand how out of touch this looks? You don't obviously care about the American people. End all of these wars.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Quest for Clarity podcast. I'm your host, Nolan. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to be honest, we got an upsetting video for you today. It's upsetting, it's enraging, it's ridiculous, and it goes against everything that we supposedly stood for. So, Donald Trump has now announced that he will be sending Patriot defense missile systems to NATO and the EU, who will then distribute those systems out to the Ukrainians. If you follow this story, you follow this war between Russia and Ukraine since its beginning a couple of years ago, and if you're on the conservative side, if you're on the MAGA side of this, and you've had the same position throughout all this time, that the U.S. shouldn't be involved in the war to the extent that it is, that is kind of the baseline position. There are different strains, of course. There are people who, like me, who think that unless we're involved in the peace brokering, we shouldn't be involved at all because it's not our war. And then there's kind of the general we should be involved less in this war. If you at all believe that we should be less involved in this war, your alarms are going off like crazy right now. Like, what is this? This is not what we campaigned on. This is against the entire message of what we argued about this war. And, I mean, all this benefits, as was reported, the only people that this benefits are the military-industrial complex, who will be manufacturing and sending out these defense systems. And even if we didn't have that report, you could kind of tell, because the people supporting this, who've come out of the woodworks and made big statements that they support this, people like Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, the senators who've made their career out of advocating for every military intervention, every last one of them. These people are all coming out and saying this is a great idea, that the U.S. needs to really make their presence known on the global stage, and that we haven't done enough to help Ukraine. As if the billions of dollars we've sent over there and all the weapons that we've sent over there throughout this entire thing wasn't enough. Oh, and the ridiculous moral lecturing that we've partaken in on the global stage. If any of that support wasn't enough, we need to send more weapons. And look, the point of this isn't to say that I think Donald Trump doesn't want peace. I actually do think Donald Trump wants peace. I think that his whole message in the campaign, I don't think that was all lies. I think that was true. I think he wants peace. I think he genuinely thought he could get this done a lot quicker than he has been able to. And I think he's probably frustrated with Putin, because I'm not going to doubt that Putin probably doesn't want peace at this point, because he sees that it's probably going well for him. And he sees the possibility that if this war continues, he's probably going to end up on the better end of it. But my position, and I think it is the correct position, is that if the U.S. isn't going to be involved in peace brokering here, then we should completely disengage. The only involvement we should have in this war is in brokering a peace deal. We shouldn't be involved in sending money to fund the war. We shouldn't be involved in sending weapons to assist in the war. And we shouldn't be involved on the intelligence end of it. Because all of that implicates us as essentially being in a proxy war with Russia, which I don't know how it's impossible to understand. That is not the position we want to be in. It's not a position we have to be in. It's a position that we are in by our own decisions and by an insane history of constantly poking the bear that is Russia through not just America itself, but NATO and Europe. All of these ridiculous policies that have led us to this point, which I'll get into in a few minutes, kind of the history here. But all of this led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which of course wasn't justified. The killing of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian civilians wasn't justified. But it was completely predictable, is the point. And there were people along the way clearly calling out that this is a ridiculous policy. The endless expansion of NATO, our endless involvement with the Europeans in terms of foreign policy, when their interests when it comes to Russia are completely different from ours. They're at much greater risk from a Russian invasion into Ukraine than we are. But what I really want to do right now is explain the history a little bit, and then also go into detail about why this is just such a ridiculous policy, and it's just so not in America's interest, and it's not an America First policy whatsoever to be involved in the war in Ukraine. So, back in the 90s, after the Soviet Union fell, we essentially in the George H.W. Bush administration, there was essentially guarantees made by Secretary of State James Baker and other people in the administration saying that America and NATO would not expand 1 inch eastward, that we would not provoke the Soviet Union, and we would not expand NATO onto Russia's border. It's kind of the essence of what was said. Now, to understand that, we have to understand the landscape of post-Soviet Union falling. This was what has been described the unipolar moment. It was the moment that America became the sole superpower on the world, and there was no longer the threat of the Soviets, and we were the superpower. No one posed a threat to America at this point. That was like it. After the Cold War, this was like kind of the end of the path of militarism. This was it. We had no threat. We had no need for the military budget we had. We had no need for the involvement with NATO. We had no need for any of this at this point because there was no threat. So we had two paths. We had the path of, are we going to make friendly relations with the world and get back to what we were supposed to be, which is a constitutional limited republic that led by our example and didn't impose ourselves on other countries, but we led by the example of having more liberty than any other country and just being friends with the world, trading, having friendly relations? Or were we going to go down the path of, no, we need to continue to funnel money to the military-industrial complex, and we'll do that by any means necessary? Spoiler alert, in case you haven't noticed, the past 30 years of foreign policy, that's the path that we took. Not only with Europe, but also with the Middle East, which I've gotten into previously. I'm sure we'll get into again in new episodes. So, in Europe, Bill Clinton started the path of expanding NATO. He made it clear in 1994, this was kind of the beginning of, we are going to expand NATO. And the exact quote is, it's no longer a question. The question is no longer whether NATO will take on new members, but when and how. So he essentially shifted the entire U.S. policy to, we are going to expand NATO. Sorry, I know we told you guys in Russia that we wouldn't do this, but we're actually going to do this. So right off the bat, there were people in the administration who were against this. We had people like Defense Secretary Bill Perry, who actually contemplated resigning, and he says in 2016 in an interview that he should have resigned at the time over that. And he blames that for the strained relationship between Russia and America today. That's not anybody saying that. That is the Secretary of Defense at the time saying that he regrets not resigning over that. Just saying. And of course, NATO expansion continues and continues. And Ukraine in specific is one that gets continuously brought up and is continuously discussed as a potential new member of NATO. In 2008, there is a memo that is sent out from William Burns, who under Joe Biden was the CIA director, but in 2008 was the ambassador to Russia under George Bush. He sends a memo, which was only leaked because of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. He sent a top secret memo to Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State, saying, it's called the Niet means Niet memo, which is no means no in Russian. And essentially the memo says that he has talked to everyone, he's had discussions with everyone on all sides of the political spectrum in Russia, and asked them about their feelings on Ukraine joining NATO. And they all, in unison, said that was their brightest red line. And he said that NATO encroachment into Ukraine would cause Russia to have to make a decision they don't want to have to make. Talking about, whether they should invade Ukraine or go to war against NATO. So it was no secret, and everyone in our government, in the top ranks of our government and our military, the military wing of our government, all knew that this was the brightest of red lines, and this was an obvious provocation of Russia. But we learned that, and then go on to, at the Bucharest summit, say that we are going to push for Ukrainian membership into NATO. So what we just don't learn is the common theme of U.S. foreign policy, as we all know from the Middle East. We just don't learn, and we have information, but for some reason, it's almost as if we're feeding a military-industrial complex. It's almost as if that is the main goal of our military action. It's almost as if it's not actually self-defense. It's pretty much that our military action has almost nothing to do with what's in the best interests of our country, but actually what's in the interests of the military contractors, Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. Then, of course, we have the biggest provocation probably of all, which was 2014 in the Maidan Revolution against President of Ukraine, Yanukovych. So essentially what had happened was Yanukovych had made an economic agreement with Russia, and he was kind of the pro-Russia president of Ukraine. He was kind of looking, there was kind of the two sides that he could have had deals with and friendships with, the NATO West side or the Russian side. And he chose to make economic deals with Russia. The citizens, and who can blame them? The citizens of Ukraine were upset with this. So they had a revolt, they had protests, mass protests in the streets. And it's one thing if these protests were natural, as everyone likes to describe them as. They weren't natural. There were $100 million of CIA funneled money under the Obama administration that were funneled into these protests. These weren't natural protests at all. You can keep a protest going for a long time when you get $100 million into the protest. Then you can afford to have concerts and celebrity appearances, and you can have all these U.S. officials in Ukraine pretty much completely involved in the coup of the government. I mean, you had John McCain traveling to dine with they were far right, the opposition party that was looking to take over the country. They were neo-Nazis that were trying to take over the country in Ukraine, and he was just having dinner with them and showing his full support for the overthrow of the Yanukovych government. We had Victoria Nuland, who was the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs under Obama, who traveled and you can look this up. She was handing out cookies and sandwiches to the protesters in the streets. And look, I go through this whole history, not to say, again, for the 1000th time, not to say that Russia was justified in their invasion of Ukraine, because of course they weren't. That doesn't even need to be said. But I explain this history to go completely against the mainstream media narrative, which is just preposterous, that this, as they said mindlessly for months after the invasion, Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign country. Number one, it wasn't unprovoked, as I just explained. And number two, Ukraine wasn't a sovereign country. Their entire policy was dictated by the CIA, by Victoria Nuland, and by the American officials. Victoria Nuland was caught on a phone call when she was listing off. She said, "quote Yats is the guy," naming all these officials that were going to take these roles in the Ukrainian government. She was caught on a phone call, a leaked phone call, describing exactly which people she wanted in each position in the Ukrainian government. And when she was told that the European Union might not like some of these people, she said, "F the EU," because it was never about the EU. It was about America asserting dominance over Ukraine, and America having a puppet government in place in Ukraine. So this was, of course, they're not a sovereign country. The line in the weeks after the invasion, where Vladimir Putin launches an unprovoked war against the sovereign country of Ukraine, and again, not unprovoked. There's an entire history here, and it's not a sovereign country. It's an American puppet government after the Maidan Revolution. It was an American puppet government. So all of this is ridiculous. And let me go back to my main point. We do this, and this is just a continuation of the same foreign policy of the Middle East over the past 30 years. America is trying to play empire. We weren't meant to be an empire. We were meant to be a limited republic. We need to get back to focusing on ourselves, get out of all these ridiculous entanglements like NATO and Ukraine and Israel. We can be friends with all these people. We don't have to be enemies with all these people. We don't have to be really enemies with any of these people. We can just mind our own business and only intervene when it's absolutely necessary for the defense of the American homeland. There's no reason when we're $37 trillion in debt and we're focused on the border of Ukraine, we're focused on the border of Israel. I mean, come on. What happened to America first? This is the farthest thing from America first. I don't understand how we can just switch on a dime and not even address it. And not even be like, I know this isn't exactly, and try and reason with the people who supported you for this. Look, you can do this and then say I know this doesn't look like it, but here's my actual plan. But it's no, there's none of that. It's this it's this acting like this was always the plan and that this just goes along with it. There's also the question of why do we owe Ukraine and Europe anything? Why do we owe them the subsidizing of their defense? We get caught up, all of our leaders get caught up in the self-righteousness, these moral games, trying to be morally superior and stand up for everybody everywhere in the world while simultaneously letting our civilians and our population collapse from beneath itself and letting our Citizens have their dollars deflated by the endless spending on ridiculous military adventurism. All while at least they feel good. At least our leaders feel morally superior. Our Lindsey Grahams and our Richard Blumenthals are going to be sitting here and acting like they're morally superior to anybody. Come on. These bloodthirsty monsters that have been advocating for the death of civilians all across the world in the name of in the name of democracy. They're going to act like they're superior because they're against big bad Putin. Yeah, I am too. And look, just to end it off here, all of this involvement in wars abroad, whether it's sending money or even dedicating a significant amount of our leaders' time in trying to facilitate some sort of action in a war across the globe, all this does is go against the needs of the American people. Because now we're not, even if we aren't sending money, we're spending a significant amount of time focusing on something that doesn't affect us at all. What we need to do is we need to get out of this. We need to completely, and if peace isn't possible, if Donald Trump has realized that peace brokered by the United States isn't possible, then maybe we should just get out and focus on ourselves and stop trying to play this role of policemen around the world that we can dictate that we can dictate every border that Putin can't cross. Sorry, we might not like it that he's crossing borders. I don't. But if we're being realistic, we are in no position besides a full-fledged war, which I'd hope that everyone out there wouldn't want, to put a stop to it. We can't. I mean, just by sending Patriot mid-defense missiles, we're doing very little to impact or to help Ukraine when it comes to the grand scheme of this war. That's not going to help them win the war. And what we need to do is either make peace, and if we can't make peace, get out. That is what is in America's interests. So thank you guys so much for watching today. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Go follow me on Instagram, X, and Spotify. Yeah, and thank you so much. Have a good day.